The great chamber of the Galactic Council was filled with beings from across the known universe. Creatures of light and shadow, of scale and crystal, of flesh and metal. All gathered in the massive circular room that had hosted negotiations for over 10,000 years. The walls curved upward like the inside of an egg, covered in screens that displayed translations in hundreds of languages. At the center, a raised platform held the speaking podium, and around it, in carefully arranged tiers, sat the representatives of 47 spacefaring species. Ambassador Linda Warren stood at the human delegations table, her hands flat against the smooth surface. She was a woman of 53 years, the gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of decades spent in difficult negotiations. Behind her sat her team of 6 advisors, including Commander Kevin Shaw, the military attaché whose calm presence had steadied many tense moments over the years. High Counselor Vethran was speaking. He was a Korathi, one of the oldest species in the council, and his blue scales caught the light as he moved his forearms in elaborate gestures. His voice was smooth and confident, the voice of someone who had never been seriously challenged in his long political career. And so we propose these modest adjustments to the existing agreements, Vethran was saying. The human colonies in the Outer Rim will be reduced in scope, allowing other species to expand into those resource-rich territories. Human fleet movements will be consolidated to a single approved corridor, reducing the potential for misunderstandings. And finally, human terraforming technology will be shared freely with all council members as a gesture of good faith and cooperation. Linda listened to every word. She had known this moment was coming. Intelligence reports had warned her weeks ago that certain council factions were planning to push humanity back to the margins. What surprised her was how bold they had become, how openly they were trying to strip away everything humanity had earned. The chamber waited for her response. Linda could feel the eyes of thousands of beings upon her, some curious, some hostile, many simply indifferent. To most of them, humanity was still a newcomer, a young species that had stumbled onto the galactic stage barely 200 years ago. They had proven useful during the Void War, certainly. Human soldiers had fought and died alongside alien allies against the terrible darkness that came from between galaxies. Human scientists had developed the resonance weapons that finally turned the tide. But the war was over now, and memories were short. "High Counselor," Linda said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. "No, I want to make sure I understand your proposal correctly. You are asking humanity to give up 60% of our established colonies. You are asking us to restrict our fleet movements to a single corridor while other species enjoy freedom of navigation throughout council space. And you are asking us to hand over technology that took us generations to develop, technology that we used to save this council 3 years ago, without any compensation whatsoever." Vethran's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of irritation. "Ambassador Warren, you phrase it in unnecessarily harsh terms. We are simply asking humanity to demonstrate its commitment to the galactic community. Surely you understand that the current arrangements were made during wartime conditions. Now that peace has returned, it is appropriate to reconsider." "Reconsider," Linda repeated. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of delegates she had worked with, argued with, sometimes even trusted. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at this proposal. I see a council that accepted human help when extinction threatened us all. I see species that were happy to shelter behind human shields while human soldiers bled and died. And now I see those same species deciding that humanity has become too successful, too influential, and needs to be cut down to size." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Delegate Sirmela of the Nethan Collective, her crystalline body pulsing with soft pink light, raised a hand for attention. "Ambassador Warren, no one is denying humanity's contributions during the crisis. But the High Counselor is correct that circumstances have changed." "Surely some adjustment is reasonable." "Adjustment," Linda said. "That's an interesting word. When we asked for adjustments to trade agreements last year, we were told that established procedures could not be changed. When we requested expanded mining rights to support our growing population, we were told that resources must be shared equally. But now, when it suits the Council's purposes, suddenly adjustment is not only possible, but necessary." She paused, gathering herself. Around her, she could sense her team tensing. They knew what was coming. They had discussed it at length during the long night before this session, weighing options, considering consequences. The decision had not been easy, but it had been unanimous. The human delegation withdraws from these proceedings, Linda announced, effective immediately. The chamber erupted. Delegates rose from their seats, voices overlapping in a chaos of languages that overwhelmed the translation systems. High Counselor Vethrin struck his podium with all four hands, calling for order.
Ambassador Warren, this is highly irregular.
You cannot simply walk away from council negotiations. Watch me, Linda said. She began gathering the data tablets from her table, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Behind her, the human delegation rose as one. This is a mistake, Vethrin warned, his voice rising. Humanity cannot survive outside the council framework. Your economy depends on our trade routes. Your colonies depend on our protection. Linda turned back to face him. Our economy depends on our own hard work. Our colonies depend on our own fleets. And our protection, High Counselor, is something this council has never provided. We protected ourselves during the Void War. We will continue to protect ourselves now. You will regret this decision. Perhaps, but I doubt it. Linda nodded to Commander Shaw, who stepped forward to address the military delegates. To my counterparts in this chamber, Kevin said. His voice calm and professional, humanity withdraws from all joint military exercises and shared defense agreements. Our forces will return to human space within the standard 30-day transition period. Any vessels that wish to maintain diplomatic contact should coordinate through standard channels. He offered a slight bow, a gesture of respect that somehow carried more weight than any threat could have. Then he turned and followed Linda toward the exit. The human delegation walked out of the council chamber in perfect formation. Behind them, the chaos continued, voices rising in anger and confusion, and for some, barely hidden fear. The great doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder. In the corridor outside, Linda allowed herself one deep breath. Her hands were shaking slightly, though she had not let it show inside. 20 years of diplomatic work, countless negotiations, friendships and rivalries built over decades, all of it left behind in a single moment. Kevin fell into step beside her. Well, he said quietly, that went about as expected.
Did you see Vethrin's face?
Asked Maria Gonzalez, one of the junior advisors. I thought his scales were going to turn purple. Still thinks we'll come crawling back within a week, Linda said. They all do. They can't imagine any species choosing isolation over their precious council membership. Will we? Maria asked. Come back, I mean. Linda considered the question as they walked. Outside the massive windows, alien stars burned in unfamiliar patterns. Somewhere, out there, beyond the borders of council space, Earth waited home. Maybe someday, she said finally, but not on these terms. And not until they understand that humanity is not a junior partner to be pushed around whenever it becomes convenient. They reached the docking bay where the human diplomatic vessel waited. As they boarded, Linda took one last look at the council complex, its towers and spires reaching toward the sky. Send a message to Earth, she told her communications officer. Tell them the talks have ended. Tell them we're coming home. And tell them to prepare for what comes next. The ship lifted off, carrying humanity's representatives away from the center of galactic civilization. Behind them, in chambers and corridors and private rooms, 47 species began to realize that something had fundamentally changed. The humans were gone. And no one quite knew what that meant. The first week after the humans left was filled with confident predictions. High Counselor Vethrin addressed the council 3 times, assuring everyone that the human withdrawal was nothing more than a negotiating tactic. They would return, he promised. They always did. Humanity was young and emotional, prone to dramatic gestures that meant nothing in the end. The council simply needed to wait them out. By the second week, the confidence began to fade. Human trade ships stopped arriving at council border stations. The steady flow of goods that had become so normal over the past century, entertainment media, medical supplies, processed foods, advanced machinery, simply vanished. Merchants who had built their businesses, On human imports found their warehouses empty and their customers angry. Delegate Sir Mala of the Nathine Collective was among the first to feel the true weight of the situation. Her species had been in the middle of colonizing a new world called Varus 7, a harsh planet that required extensive terraforming to support life. Human engineers had been leading the project, operating the complex atmospheric process. Ores that slowly converted the toxic air into something breathable. The humans had left with everyone else. The processors continued running on automatic, but within 3 weeks, warning lights began to flash on control panels that no one knew how to read. "We need to contact the humans," Sir Mela told the emergency council session. Her crystalline body had darkened to a deep blue, a sign of stress that her species could not hide. "My people on Varus 7 are in danger. The atmospheric systems are failing, and we do not have the knowledge to repair them." "Absolutely not," Vethrin replied. "Any contact with humanity at this stage would be seen as weakness. They would use it against us in future negotiations." "There may not be future negotiations if my colonists die," Sir Mala said sharply. 300,000 people are depending on those systems. We have perhaps 2 months before the atmosphere becomes toxic again. The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence. Everyone knew she was right, but no one wanted to be the first to admit it. On Earth, news of the Council's troubles spread quickly through official channels and unofficial ones. Secretary of State Daniel Porter reviewed the intelligence reports each morning, tracking the growing chaos with careful attention. "The Nethian situation is deteriorating faster than expected," reported Deputy Secretary Maria Gonzalez during their daily briefing. "Our analysts estimate they have 6 weeks before they need to start evacuations." "And the other species?" Daniel asked. "The Korathi are experiencing what their media is calling a cultural crisis. Human entertainment accounted for almost half of their domestic consumption. Without our films and music and interactive experiences, their population is restless. There have been protests in several major cities." Daniel nodded slowly. He had expected something like this, though the speed still surprised him. Humanity had spent 2 centuries building connections throughout council space, becoming essential to dozens of different economies in ways that were easy to overlook until they were gone. "What about the Void Eaters?" he asked. Maria's expression sobered. "That's the more concerning news. Our long-range sensors are detecting increased activity along the frontier. Nothing definitive yet, but the patterns match what we saw before the last war. Have we shared this with anyone?" "No. Should we?" Daniel stood and walked to the window of his office. Outside, the capital city hummed with the normal activities of a normal day. People going to work, children heading to school. Life continuing as it always had. They trusted their government to keep them safe, to make the right decisions in moments like this. "Not yet," he said finally. "Let them feel the weight of our absence a little longer. When we do share intelligence, we want them to understand its value." Back in council space, the 3rd week brought new problems. The Voxan hegemony, a species of insectoid beings whose population was aging rapidly, had relied heavily on human medical technology. Their hospitals were running out of critical supplies, and their doctors did not know how to manufacture replacements. Ambassador Kreldon of the Voxan requested a private meeting with High Counselor Vethrin. "My government is instructing me to open back-channel communications with Earth," Kreldon said, his mandibles clicking with barely contained frustration. "Our elder care facilities are facing shortages that will become fatal within months. We cannot wait for this political standoff to resolve itself. If you contact the humans independently, you will undermine our collective bargaining position," Vethrin warned. "What bargaining position? The humans are not bargaining. They are simply not here. Meanwhile, my people are suffering." Vethrin's 4 hands tightened into fists. "The Council must present a united front. If individual species begin making separate deals with humanity, the entire structure of our alliance falls apart." Perhaps, Kreldon replied, that structure deserves to fall apart. Perhaps it was never as strong as we believed. He left without waiting for a response. On the human colony world of New Portland, life went on much as it had before. The planet was one of humanity's newer settlements. Less than 50 years old, but it had grown into a thriving community of 3 million people. Farms covered the temperate zones. Factories produced everything from furniture to spacecraft components. And the population was young and optimistic about the future. Governor Susan Martinez addressed her citizens through the planetary broadcast network. "Many of you have been asking about the council situation," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "I want you to know that New Portland is fully prepared for this transition. Our food supplies are secure. Our manufacturing is self-sufficient. We have good relationships with our neighboring human colonies, and our fleet is positioned to protect us from any threats." Looking directly into the camera, "Some of you may have heard rumors that we cannot survive without council trade. That is simply not true. Humanity built these colonies with our own hands. We defended them with our own blood during the Void War. We do not need permission from anyone to continue building our future." The broadcast ended, and Susan turned to her aide with a tired smile. "Do you think they believed it?" the aide asked. "They believe it because it's true," Susan replied. "We've been preparing for this possibility for years. Every colony world has stockpiles, redundant systems, backup plans. The council thought they were our lifeline. They never realized we were theirs." By the end of the 6th week, the first unofficial envoy from Council space crossed into human territory. It was a small ship from the Kellery, a minor species that had long been ignored in Council politics. They carried a simple message: "We want to talk, just us." Without Council involvement, Captain Nancy Coleman of the patrol cruiser Resolute intercepted them at the border. "You understand," she told the Kellery representative through the communication link, "that any agreements we make will be between our peoples alone. The Council will not be involved." "That's precisely what we hope," the Kellery replied. "The Council has never done anything for us. Perhaps humanity will be different." Nancy smiled and transmitted the coordinates for a meeting location. Behind her, her bridge crew exchanged glances. Something was changing out there in the wider galaxy. The old order was crumbling, and humanity was positioned to help build whatever came next. The silence had done its work. Now came the harder part: deciding what to do with the opportunities it had created. The Kellery were only the beginning. Within 2 months of the human withdrawal, representatives from 11 different species had made quiet journeys to the borders of human space. They came in small ships with unofficial credentials, carrying messages that their governments could deny if necessary. But they all carried the same basic request: "We want to make our own arrangements with humanity." Separate from the Council, Secretary of State Daniel Porter established a temporary diplomatic station on the edge of human territory, a converted cargo vessel named the Open Hand. It was a deliberate choice. The ship was not impressive or threatening, just a practical space for practical conversations. "The Nethene delegation is arriving tomorrow," Maria Gonzalez reported during their morning briefing. "Cirmela herself is leading it." "That's significant." "She's desperate," Daniel replied. "The Vera 7 situation is getting worse. Their evacuation ships can only move about 50,000 people at a time, and they've already lost 2 atmospheric processors. Are we going to help them?" Daniel considered the question carefully. This was the moment they had been working toward, the moment when Council species would begin to understand that humanity's cooperation was not something to be taken for granted. But there was a difference between teaching a lesson and causing unnecessary suffering. "We'll help them," he said, "but we're going to get something real in return. Not promises, not future considerations. Something concrete." The negotiations with the Nethene lasted 3 days. Cirmela was a skilled diplomat, but she was negotiating from a position of weakness, and everyone in the room knew it. In the end, humanity agreed to send terraforming engineers back to Vera 7 in exchange for full mineral rights to 3 uninhabited systems in Nethene space. "This is generous of you," Cirmela said after the agreement was signed. Her crystalline body had lightened to a soft green, a sign of relief. "Many of my colleagues expected you to demand much more." "We're not interested in crushing anyone," Daniel replied. "We want fair partnerships. That's what we always wanted from the Council." It's what we never got. Sermela nodded slowly. I begin to understand why you walked away. We treated you as junior members, useful, but not truly important. That was a mistake. Yes, Daniel agreed. It was. Back in council space, High Counselor Vethrin watched his coalition fracture with growing alarm. Every day brought news of another species making independent contact with humanity. The Voxen had secured medical supplies in exchange for navigation data. The Kalori had established a full trade agreement. Even the proud Karathi were beginning to waver. As protests in their capital city grew larger and more demanding, Vethrin called an emergency session of his closest allies. The inner circle that had ruled the council for generations. This cannot continue, he declared. Every agreement these species make with humanity weakens our collective position. We must take action. What action? Asked Ambassador Rethelville of the Solani Confederation. We cannot force Sovereign S. Pessis to follow our lead. That was never how the council worked. Then perhaps how the council works needs to change. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what Vethrin was suggesting. For thousands of years, the council had operated on principles of voluntary cooperation and consensus decision-making. What he was proposing was something very different. You cannot be serious, Rethelville said finally. If we try to coerce our own members, we will lose them entirely. They will leave the council just as the humans did. They will not dare. We control the trade routes, the communication networks, the defense infrastructure. Without us, they would be isolated and vulnerable. The humans seem to be managing quite well in isolation. Vethrin's scales darkened to a deep purple. The humans are different. They have always been different. That is precisely why they needed to be contained. And how well has that strategy worked? Rethelville stood, his tall frame casting a shadow across the table. I have watched you maneuver against humanity for years, Vethrin. You convinced yourself that they were a threat that needed to be controlled. But all you have accomplished is proving to them that we were never their friends. And now they are showing every other species that the council is not as essential as we claimed. He walked toward the door. Where are you going? Vethrin demanded. To contact my government. The Solani Confederation will be sending our own delegation to human space. You can try to stop us if you wish, but I think you will find that your power is not what it once was. The door closed behind him, and Vethrin found himself alone with the handful of supporters who remained. For the first time in his long career, he felt the cold touch of real fear. On Earth, President Charles Murphy received daily briefings on the evolving situation. The strategy was working better than anyone had expected. Humanity's withdrawal had exposed the fragility of the council's structure, and species that had once seemed firmly aligned with the existing order were now scrambling to secure their own interests. The question, Charles said during a cabinet meeting, is what comes next. We've demonstrated that we can survive without the council. We've shown that other species need us more than we need them. But where do we go from here? We could continue building bilateral relationships, suggested Defense Secretary Anthony Reyes. Keep the council marginal while we establish our own network of allies. That might work in the short term, Maria Gonzalez replied. But the Void Eaters are still out there. If they attack again, we'll need coordinated defense across multiple species. Bilateral agreements won't be enough, so we need something like the council, Charles said. But different. Better. A new organization, Daniel agreed. One where humanity has real influence from the beginning. One where the rules are fair and apply equally to everyone. Charles nodded slowly. Start drafting proposals. Talk to our new allies. Find out what kind of structure they would support. But be careful. We don't want to look like we're trying to replace one empire with another. What about the Karathi? Anthony asked. Vethrin is still technically in charge, but his support is collapsing. If we could bring them into our network, the council would effectively cease to exist. The Karathi will come around eventually, Charles said. Their people are already demanding change. We just need to give them a reason to believe that change is possible. That reason came sooner than anyone expected. 1 week later, a Karathi cargo ship arrived at the open hand carrying an unusual passenger. It was Velson, the younger sister of High Counselor Vethrin himself, and she brought a message that would change everything. My brother has lost the confidence of our people, she told Daniel Porter in a private meeting. His policies have damaged our economy and our relationships. Many of us believe it is time for new leadership and new approaches. And what do you want from us? Daniel asked. Help us remove him from power? In exchange, we will support whatever new galactic structure humanity wishes to create. Daniel studied her carefully. This was the opportunity they had been waiting for, but it was also dangerous. Direct interference in another species' internal politics could set a terrible precedent. We won't help you overthrow your government, he said finally. That's not who we are. But if your people choose new leadership through legitimate means, we will be happy to work with whoever emerges. And we will make sure everyone knows that humanity supports peaceful change. Velson considered his words, then nodded. That may be enough. Thank you, Secretary Porter. She left, and Daniel sat alone in his office, thinking about what was to come. The old order was dying. Something new was being born, and humanity would be there to help shape it. The fall of High Counselor Vethrin was not dramatic. There was no revolution, no violence, no sudden collapse. Instead, it was a slow erosion, like water wearing away stone over countless. Years compressed into a few short months, it began with the protests in the Korathi capital. What had started as scattered demonstrations about entertainment shortages grew into something larger. A movement of citizens who had begun to question everything their government had told them about the Galactic Order. Young Korathi shared human films and music through underground networks, and with those cultural products came ideas about freedom, self-determination, and the right to choose one's own path. Velson did not lead the movement directly. She was too smart for that, and too aware of how her connection to her brother would complicate things. Instead, she worked quietly behind the scenes, connecting reformist politicians with sympathetic military officers, ensuring that when the moment came, the transition would be peaceful. 3 months after her secret meeting with Daniel Porter, the Korathi Parliament voted to remove Vethrin from his position as High Counselor. The vote was not close. Even many of his former allies had abandoned him, recognizing that his policies had led their species to the edge of disaster. Vethrin accepted the verdict with what dignity he could manage. In his final address to the Parliament, he warned that humanity would eventually betray them all, now that the young species could not be trusted with the power it was accumulating. Few listened. They had heard his warnings before. They had seen where those warnings led. The news spread across council space like wildfire. If the Korathi, the oldest and most powerful species in the galactic community, could change their leadership in response to the human withdrawal, then anything was possible. Reform movements that had been suppressed for generations suddenly found new energy. Politicians who had spent their careers defending the existing order began quietly repositioning themselves. On Earth, President Charles Murphy addressed the nation. Today marks a turning point in galactic history, he said. The old structures that governed relations between species are changing. Humanity did not seek to destroy the Council, but we refused to accept a system that treated us as second-class members of the galactic community. Now, other species are recognizing that they too deserve better. He paused, his expression serious. But I want to be clear about something. We are not trying to replace one empire with another. We do not want to dominate other species or force them to follow our lead. What we want is partnership, real partnership, based on mutual respect and shared interests. That is what we will work to build in the months ahead. The response from other species was overwhelmingly positive. Delegations poured into human space, no longer hiding their visits or pretending to be unofficial. They came with proposals for trade agreements, defense pacts, scientific cooperation, and cultural exchange. They came because they finally believed that humanity meant what it said. Secretary of State Daniel Porter worked 18-hour days managing the flood of diplomatic activity. His staff expanded from 12 people to over 100, and still they struggled to keep up with demand. The old conference ship Open Hand was replaced by a proper diplomatic station, a massive structure capable of hosting representatives from dozens of species simultaneously. We need to start thinking about structure. Daniel told his senior staff during one of their rare, quiet moments. All these bilateral agreements are useful, but they're not sustainable. We need something more organized. A new council, asked Maria Gonzalez. Something like that, but different. We need to learn from what went wrong with the old system. I spent weeks developing proposals, consulting with allies, refining ideas based on feedback from species across the galaxy. The key principles emerged gradually through countless discussions. Equal representation for all members, regardless of size or power. Transparent decision-making processes, clear rules that apply to everyone. And most importantly, no permanent leadership positions that could be captured by any single species or faction, calling it the Galactic Compact. Daniel explained to President Murphy during a briefing. Not a council, not a federation, a compact. An agreement between equals. Will the others accept it? Most of them are enthusiastic. The Nathene, the Kellery, the Voxen, they've all indicated support. Even the new Karathi government is interested, though they're being careful not to move too fast. What about the holdouts? There must be some species who prefer the old system. The Solani are nervous about anything that might reduce their influence. The Mech-3 are suspicious of any organization, no matter how it's structured. And there are smaller species who worry that they'll be overlooked in any new arrangement. How do we address those concerns? By showing them that the compact will actually do what it promises. We're proposing a founding assembly where every species, no matter how small, has an equal voice in shaping the rules. Once people see that we're serious about fairness, most of the resistance should fade. The founding assembly was scheduled for 6 months later. Enough time for interested species to prepare their positions and for the organizers to work out the countless logistical details. The location was carefully chosen, a neutral station in an unclaimed system. Far from any species' home territory, but even as preparations moved forward, darker news arrived from the Frontier Admiral. Christopher Young of the Earth Defense Fleet requested an urgent meeting with the President. The Void Eaters are mobilizing, he reported, his face grim. Our long-range sensors have detected fleet movements consistent with pre-invasion staging. We estimate they'll be ready for a major offensive within 18 months. Charles felt a chill run through him. The Void War had been the defining crisis of his generation, a conflict that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization. Millions had died. Entire worlds had been consumed. Victory had come at a terrible price, and now it seemed that price might have only bought them a temporary peace. Do the other species know? He asked. We've shared intelligence with our closest allies. The response has been concerning. Many of them reduced their military spending after the war. They assumed the Void Eaters were defeated permanently. They're not ready for another conflict, and we are better than most. We maintained our fleet strength and continued developing new weapon systems. But alone, we can't hold the frontier. We need coordinated defense across multiple species. Charles stood and walked to the window of his office. Outside, the capital city spread beneath a clear blue sky, peaceful and prosperous, unaware of the threat gathering in the darkness between galaxies. Hey, this changes everything, he said quietly. The compact isn't just about trade and diplomacy anymore. It's about survival. Yes, sir. Make sure Admiral Young's report reaches every species that's participating in the founding assembly. They need to understand what's at stake. This isn't about politics or economics. It's about whether galactic civilization survives the next decade. The news spread quickly, carried by diplomatic couriers and encrypted communications to every corner of known space. Species that had been hesitant about joining the compact suddenly found new motivation. The Void Eaters did not distinguish between old powers and new ones, between council members and outsiders. They consumed everything in their path with equal indifference. On the frontier station, where the founding assembly would meet, construction crews worked around the clock to prepare the facilities. What had been planned as a diplomatic conference was becoming something more, a war council, a gathering of species who had finally recognized that their survival depended on each other. Linda Warren, who had walked out of the old council chamber almost a year earlier, was named to lead the human delegation to the founding assembly. Nervous? Asked Commander Kevin Shaw as their ship approached the station. Terrified, Linda admitted. A year ago I thought walking out of those negotiations was the hardest thing I would ever do. Now I realize it was just the beginning. We got them to the table, Kevin said. That's more than anyone expected. Getting them to the table is the easy part. Getting them to actually work together, to trust each other, to fight alongside each other when the Void Eaters come. That's something else entirely. She watched the station grow larger in the viewport, its lights blazing against the darkness of space. But we have to try, she said. Because the alternative is extinction. And humanity didn't survive everything we've been through just to be consumed by darkness. The ship docked, and Linda Warren walked forward to meet whatever came next. The founding assembly of the Galactic Compact began on a morning that had no morning. In a station that orbited no world, under stars that belonged to no one, representatives from 38 species filled the great circular chamber that had been built specifically for this moment. Unlike the old council hall with its tiered seating that placed some species above others, this room arranged everyone in a single curved row, each position equal in height and prominence. Linda Warren stood at the speaker's podium, looking out at the assembled delegates. She saw faces and forms of every description, creatures of light and shadow, of scale and crystal, of flesh and metal. Some had been allies during the Void War. Some had been rivals in the Council. Some had never interacted with humanity before the events of the past. All of them were here because they recognized a simple truth. The old ways were not working, and something new was needed. 1 year ago, Linda began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems. I stood in another chamber much like this one. I announced that humanity was withdrawing from negotiations with the Galactic Council. At the time, many thought we were making a terrible mistake. Some predicted we would come crawling back within weeks. Others believed we were abandoning the galactic community forever. She paused, letting the words settle. We did neither. Instead, we waited. We watched. And we learned something important about ourselves and about all of you. We learned that the relationships between species cannot be built on hierarchy and tradition alone. They must be built on genuine respect, on fair treatment, on the recognition that every species, no matter how old or young, how powerful or weak, has value and dignity. In the audience, Delegate Sermela of the Nethan Collective listened with her crystalline body glowing a soft, hopeful blue. Beside her sat the new Karathi representative, a young reformist named Tethfal, who had been part of the movement that removed her predecessor. Across the chamber, Ambassador Kreldon of the Voxan hegemony nodded slowly, his mandibles clicking in quiet agreement. We are gathered here to create something new, Linda continued. Not a replacement for the old council, but something genuinely different. A compact between equals. An agreement that binds us together not through coercion or convenience, but through shared purpose and mutual commitment. She gestured to the screens around the chamber, which displayed the proposed charter of the Galactic Compact. The document before you represents months of consultation with species across the galaxy. Its principles are simple. Equal representation for all members. Transparent decision-making. Rules that apply to everyone equally. No permanent positions of power that can be captured by any single species or faction. And most importantly, a commitment to collective defense against any threat to galactic civilization. At the mention of collective defense, a ripple of tension passed through the assembly. Everyone knew about the Void Eater mobilization. The intelligence reports had been shared widely in the weeks before the gathering. What had been an abstract possibility was now a concrete threat, one that gave urgency to everything they were trying to accomplish. I will not pretend that this will be easy, Linda said. We come from different worlds with different histories and different needs. We have quarreled with each other for thousands of years. Some of those quarrels have left deep wounds that will take generations to heal. But we have also fought alongside each other. We have traded with each other, learned from each other, helped each other in times of crisis. Those connections are real, and they matter. She stepped back from the podium and spread her arms wide, a gesture of openness and invitation. Humanity does not seek to lead this compact. We do not want to replace one dominant species with another. What we want is to be partners in building something that serves all of us, something that protects all of us, something that allows every species to reach its full potential without being held back by artificial barriers or ancient prejudices. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Tethfel, the young Karathi representative, rose from her seat. The Karathi sovereignty supports the proposed charter, she announced. We recognize that our previous leadership made mistakes that damaged trust between our peoples. We commit to rebuilding that trust through actions, not words. And we pledge our full support to the collective defense against the Void Eaters. One by one, other delegates rose to add their voices. Sermela spoke for the Nathene, acknowledging humanity's help during the Verisaven crisis and expressing hope for continued cooperation. Kreldon represented the Voxen, his aged voice steady as he described his species. Gratitude for the medical assistance that had saved thousands of elderly citizens. The Kalor representative, speaking in the Great Assembly for the first time in their history, declared that her species had finally found partners who treated them with respect. Not every speech was positive. Some delegates expressed reservations about moving too quickly. Others worried about the practical challenges of coordinating defense across so many different species. A few questioned whether the compact could truly deliver on its promises of equality and fairness. Linda listened to every concern with patience and attention. This was not a moment for rushing or forcing agreement. The compact would only work if its members truly believed in it. And that belief had to be earned through genuine engagement with their doubts and fears. The debates continued for 3 days. Proposals were modified, language was refined, compromises were reached. When disagreements seemed impossible to resolve, small groups broke off for private discussions, returning with creative solutions that addressed everyone's core concerns. On the final day, the charter was put to a vote. 36 of the 38 species present voted in favor. The 2 abstentions came from minor species who wanted more time to consult with their governments, but both indicated they would likely join within months. The Galactic Compact was born. Linda. Warren was chosen to serve as the first Secretary General, a rotating position that would pass to a different species every 2 years. She accepted reluctantly, aware of the burden she was taking on and the expectations she would have to meet. This is not an ending, she told the Assembly in her acceptance speech. It is a beginning. The real work starts now. We must build the institutions that will make this compact function. We must establish the military coordination that will protect us from the Void Eaters. We must create the economic relationships that will allow all our peoples to prosper. None of this will happen automatically. It will require effort, compromise, and patience from all of us. She looked around the chamber one final time, but I believe we can do it. Not because we are perfect, but because we have learned from our mistakes. Not because we trust each other completely, but because we have decided to give trust a chance. And not because we are certain of success, but because the alternative is unacceptable. That evening, Linda stood on an observation deck overlooking the station's docking bays. Ships from dozens of species filled the space around them, a fleet assembled not for war but for hope. Commander Kevin Shaw found her there, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "You should be celebrating," he said, offering her one of the cups. "Ill," she replied. "Eventually, right now I'm just trying to understand what we've accomplished. You've changed the galaxy." "That's not nothing," Linda shook her head. "The galaxy changed itself. We just showed it that change was possible." Kevin considered this for a moment, then raised his cup. "To possibility, then?" Linda touched her cup to his. "To possibility, and to whatever comes next." Far away in the darkness between galaxies, ancient intelligences continued their preparations. They had consumed countless civilizations across the eons, spreading like a plague through the universe. The species of this galaxy had resisted them once, but that had been a temporary setback. They would return, stronger than before, and they would consume everything in their path. But this time, when they came, they would find something unexpected. Not a collection of squabbling species, each looking out for its own interests. Not a hierarchy where the strong exploited the weak. Instead, they would find a compact of equals, united in purpose, and prepared to defend each other to the last. The Void Eaters had never faced anything like that before, and somewhere in the back of her mind, Linda Warren suspected that would make all the difference. The stars burned on, indifferent to the struggles of the creatures beneath them. But those creatures had found each other, had learned to work together, had built something worth defending. Whatever darkness was coming, they would face it together. That was enough. That was everything.